You know how you click a link or open an app and it just appears, like instantly?
Yeah, that feeling.
That feeling of instant access online, whether you're browsing, using apps, grabbing files from the cloud. Um, a lot of that speed comes down to this behind the scenes thing called caching.
It really does. And today we're diving into caching, this sort of everyday digital superpower.
But also looking at a potential hidden danger,
Gosh,
cache poisoning.
exactly. Think of caching like a digital shortcut or memory aid.
Okay.
It's all about keeping information you use a lot close at hand, ready to go, so you don't have to fetch it from far away every single time. It's fundamental to how the internet feels fast.
So, okay, let's break it down. What is a cache, fundamentally? What's the actual mechanism?
Well, simply put, a cache is just a temporary storage place. It could be hardware, it could be software,
Right.
and it just holds copies of data. Its main job,
Mhm.
serve future requests for that same data, but way faster.
Like taking a shortcut instead of the scenic route every time.
Precisely. Instead of always going back to the original source, your device or the network can often just grab it from this nearby quick spot. And you find them everywhere, inside your computer's processor, on web servers.
Right, so it's not just one single type of cache then. I guess how my phone speeds things up is probably different from how, say, a huge website handles millions of users.
Absolute different needs, different caches. You've got memory caches, often called CPU caches. They're right inside the processor.
Super fast, presumably.
Incredibly fast. They store instructions and data the CPU uses constantly. Makes your computer run programs much quicker.
Okay.
Then there are disk caches. They take frequently used data from your slower hard drive and keep it in faster storage like RAM or an SSD.
So opening files, launching apps feels snappier.
Exactly. But for our deep dive today, the main focus is really on web caches.
Web caches, yeah, that makes sense given how much we do online. So what's their specific role?
So web caches store copies of web page elements, things like images, videos, the code files, all that stuff,
And this helps how?
in a few key ways. First, it cuts down the amount of data flying across the internet, saves bandwidth.
Right.
Second, it takes load off the main web servers. They don't have to answer every single request individually.
Less strain on the source.
Yep. And most importantly for you, the user, websites just load faster, much faster sometimes.
And a big example of this is a CDN, right? Content Delivery Network.
Perfect example. CDNs are essentially massive distributed web caching systems.
Okay, CDN, I hear that term a lot. How do they fit into this caching picture? How do they work?
Well, think about your web browser on your own computer first.
Yeah.
Has a small cache, right?
Yeah, stores images and stuff from sites I visit.
Exactly. So when you go back to a site, it often loads quicker because some files are already there locally.
Makes sense.
CDNs do something similar, but like on a global scale. They run these huge networks of powerful proxy servers placed strategically all over the world.
Closer to the users?
Right. So the first time someone in, say, London requests a video hosted by a server in California, the CDN might download that video to its own server in London or nearby.
Okay.
Then the next person in London who wants that same video, they get it from the London CDN server. Much faster, much less distance for the data to travel.
Ah, so it's like creating local hubs for popular internet content all around the planet.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so when I click something, how does the system decide? Does it check the cache first, or does it just go straight to the source? How does it know?
That's where we get the terms cache hit and cache miss.
Mm.
It always checks the cache first.
Always.
Generally, yes. So the device or network requests some data. First stop.
Mm.
Check the relevant cache. If the data is there, bingo.
That's a cache hit.
That's a cache hit. The data is returned almost instantly, feels super fast.
And I guess a cache miss is the opposite.
Exactly. If the requested data isn't in the cache, that's a cache miss.
So then what happened?
Then the system has no choice but to go to the original source, the main web server, or the database, whatever it is.
The long route.
Long route. It retrieves the data, sends it back to you, and crucially, it usually stores a copy in the cache on the way.
Ah, so it prepares for next time.
Precisely. So the next request for that same data is much more likely to be a cache hit.
Okay, it's really clear how vital caching is for just making the internet usable, making it feel fast. So why the concern? What's the dark side here?
Well, like many things designed for efficiency, this reliance on temporary copies, on these shortcuts, creates an opportunity for bad actors.
And that leads us to cache poisoning.
That leads us to cache poisoning. Yeah,
Doesn't sound good. What exactly is it?
it's pretty much what it sounds like. Cache poisoning is an attack where someone deliberately tricks a cache into storing incorrect or misleading or sometimes actively harmful data
Instead of the real data.
instead of the real data.
Mm.
And the nasty part is, once that poison data is in the cache, anyone who requests it afterwards gets served the bad version.
Oh, wow. So what kind of problems can that cause?
A whole range, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
It could be used to spread malware, display fake website content to fish for your details, maybe steal login tokens or session cookies.
So you could think you're on your bank's website, but you're actually looking at a fake version served from a poisoned cache.
That's definitely a possible scenario, yes. Genuinely unsettling.
Has this been a known issue for a while? Is it new?
Oh, it's been understood, at least conceptually, for quite some time. The understanding has definitely evolved, though, way back in 1983, actually.
93. Wow.
Yeah, researcher Christoph Schuba wrote about weaknesses in DNS, the domain name system.
The internet's phone book, right, matches website names to IP addresses.
Exactly. And one of the things Schuba pointed out was a potential for DNS cache poisoning. The basic idea was attackers could sneak extra bogus information into DNS replies.
And if the DNS server believed it,
It would store that fake data in its cache. So later, it would give out the wrong IP address for a website.
which lets attackers redirect traffic, like a man-in-the-middle attack.
Precisely. Intercepting communication, sending users to malicious sites without them realizing.
Okay, so the theory was there early on. Did we see actual exploits based on this?
Yes. Fast forward a few years to 1997, a major vulnerability was found in Bind.
Bindy. That's the software a lot of DNS servers run on, isn't it?
Still very widely used
Yeah.
today, yes. And the flaw was, honestly, kind of simple in retrospect. The transaction IDs Bind used weren't properly randomized. They were sequential, predictable.
Transaction IDs. Remind me what those do again in DNS?
Okay, so when your computer asks a DNS server, what's the IP, for example, .com, it puts a unique ID number on that request.
Right.
The server, when it replies to the IP address, includes that same ID. It's like a little matching tag confirming this answer is for your specific question.
A digital handshake?
Sort of, yeah.
Ooh.
But because Bindy's IDs were predictable back then, an attacker could guess the next ID the server was expecting.
Oh.
Yeah, so the attacker could send their own fake DNS reply, pretending to be the authoritative server, if they timed it right and guessed the ID correctly.
The target DNS server might accept the fake answer.
Exactly, and stored it in its cache, poisoning it for everyone else who used that server.
Oh, wow. That seems pretty fundamental. How did they fix that?
Thankfully, the community jumped on it. Newer Bind versions started using properly randomized transaction IDs. That made guessing the right ID exponentially harder, basically impossible to do reliably.
Okay, so they closed that specific door, but security is a cat and mouse game.
Always is. Attackers started looking for other angles. And in 2002, another researcher, Wagner Sacramento, found a different issue, also with Bindy.
What was this one?
He noticed that if a Bind server didn't have an answer cached and had to ask other servers a recursive query, it would sometimes send out multiple identical queries at the same time for the same name.
Okay. Seems maybe inefficient, but dangerous.
It turned out to be dangerous because of statistics, specifically something called the birthday paradox.
Ah, the birthday thing. Where you only need, 23 people in a room for a 50-50 chance to share a birthday?
That's the one. Applied to DNS, sending multiple queries at once dramatically lowered the number of spoofed packets an attacker needed to send to have a decent chance of one of them hitting the right timing and potentially the right, though now randomized, transaction ID.
So it made the attack easier again, even with random IDs.
It significantly reduced the difficulty, yes.
Yeah.
Instead of needing maybe tens of thousands of spoofed packets, you might only need a few hundred. Made the attack much more practical.
That's a clever exploitation of an unexpected behavior.
It really was.
Yeah.
And Sacramento's work also spurred the CERT folks, the Computer Emergency Response Team, to look harder at Bindy's random number generation in general.
Were there other worries?
Yeah, there were parallels drawn to other research, like Michael Zalewski's work showing predictable TCP sequence numbers in some operating systems.
Right.
The core worry was, if the randomness underpinning these critical internet protocols isn't truly random, what other attacks might be possible?
It highlights how complex these systems are and how one small weakness can be leveraged. So we've dug into DNS cache poisoning history quite a bit. What other kinds of caches are major targets for poisoning?
Well, besides DNS, the big ones are definitely web caches, including those CDNs we talked about. Attackers find ways to trick them into storing malicious web content.
Like injecting bad JavaScript or something?
Could be, yeah. or redirecting users, displaying fake login forms, all sorts of stuff. And then there's also database cache poisoning.
Poisoning database results. How does that work?
It's maybe less common, but the idea is to alter the results of common database queries that get cached for speed. So when an application asks the database for, say, product information, it gets back incorrect or manipulated data from the poison cache.
Okay, so let's dig into the how a bit more for today. We touched on the old DNS attacks. What about a more modern web cache poisoning scenario? How might that play out?
Right, the modern web cache attacks are often quite subtle. They don't necessarily involve breaking the cache software itself. Instead, they exploit how the web application interacts with the cache.
Okay, how so?
One common technique involves finding ways to make the web application reflect some user input back in the response page, but in a way that the CDN or web cache also decides to cache.
Reflect user input. Like if a search term appears on the results page.
Sort of, but often attackers look for less obvious things. They might manipulate HTTP headers, for instance. Or a key area they investigate is cookie reflection.
Cookie reflection.
Yeah, they test if any data they put into a cookie sent to the website ends up being included, reflected, somewhere in the HTML or headers of the response page from the website.
Okay.
And crucially, they check if that specific response with the reflected cookie data gets cached by the CDN.
Ah, I think I see where this is going.
If they find such a spot where their cookie data gets reflected and cached, they can then craft a cookie containing malicious content, maybe some harmful JavaScript.
Right.
They send a request with this malicious cookie. The website reflects it in the response. The CDN sees the response for that specific URL and maybe header's cookie state and caches it, bad payload included.
So the next user who requests that same page from the CDN
Gets the poisoned version straight from the cache, potentially executing the attacker's malicious script in their browser.
Wow. That's sneaky. It's using the application and the cache's own logic against them, not breaking in, but tricking the system.
Exactly. It's about understanding and manipulating those subtle interactions between the application, the cache, and the HTTP protocol itself. It can be quite complex to find these vulnerabilities.
And you mentioned exploring a real attack in something called web cache deception later.
Yeah, absolutely. Web cache deception is related but distinct. It tricks the cache into storing sensitive, private user data that should never have been cached publicly. Both are fascinating areas we definitely want to cover in more detail.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. A real look under the hood at something we rely on constantly. So just to wrap up the main points, caching is critical for internet speed. Absolutely essential.
Couldn't function at the speed we expect without it.
Yeah, but it's vulnerable. This thing called cache poisoning allows attackers to slip bad data into these caches.
That's the core threat. And it applies to different types, DNS caches, web caches like CDNs, even database caches. The goal is always to get users to receive and trust malicious or incorrect information served from that cache.
And for us as users, the scary part is we might interact with this poisoned content without any clue that the cache was the weak link. We might just see a weird website or get redirected somewhere unexpected.
Exactly. The attack happens upstream, in the infrastructure. You just see the end result, which could be anything from annoying misinformation to serious compromise like malware infection or credential theft.
It really does underscore this reliance we have on systems working correctly and how these efficiency mechanisms, these shortcuts, can themselves become attack vectors.
It's a constant balancing act in security performance versus risk.
It definitely leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Thinking about all the invisible complexity just beneath the surface of our daily digital lives. What other hidden vulnerabilities might be lurking in the tech we use without a second thought? How do we even start to become more aware?
That's the big question, isn't it? Something to definitely keep mulling over.